The bullet tore through Violet Gardner's spine on a Tuesday afternoon in August 1878, when all she had wanted was to buy flour and sugar at Montrose's general store. But a bank robbery 2 doors down changed everything in the space of a heartbeat. She had been 22 years old, full of dreams about expanding her late father's ranch, and then suddenly she was on the wooden planks of the boardwalk, unable to feel anything below her waist, watching her own blood pool beneath her cotton dress while screams echoed around her and gunshots continued to crack through the air. The outlaws had fled by the time Doc Pritchard reached her. He was a weathered man in his 60s who had seen more injuries than anyone in Montrose cared to count, and when he examined her in his small clinic above the barber shop, his expression told Violet everything she needed to know before he even spoke the words. Her mother, Sarah, gripped Violet's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and her younger brother, Thomas, stood in the corner with tears streaming down his 17-year-old face. "The bullet did damage I cannot repair," Doc Pritchard said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "It severed the connection in your spine, Miss Gardner. I am truly sorry, but you will never walk again." Violet had stared at the ceiling for a long time after that, counting the cracks in the plaster and wondering how life could change so completely in such a short span of time. Her father had died 2 years earlier from pneumonia, leaving her to run the ranch with her mother and brother. They had a small herd of cattle, some horses, and enough land to make a decent living if they worked hard. Now she could not even stand on her own 2 feet. The weeks that followed were dark ones. Violet refused visitors, refused to eat much of anything, and spent her days in the bedroom she had grown up in, staring out the window at the Colorado mountains in the distance. Her mother tried everything to lift her spirits, but grief had settled over Violet like a heavy blanket she could not shake off. Thomas did his best to keep the ranch running, but he was young and inexperienced, and Violet could see the strain beginning to show on his face. It was during the 4th week of her confinement that Zachary Vaughn showed up at their door. Violet heard his voice from her bedroom, a deep rumble that carried through the small ranch house. Her mother answered, and there was a long conversation that Violet could not quite make out. Then her mother appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain. "There is a man here," Sarah said. "Zachary Vaughn. He says he is looking for work and he heard we might need help with the ranch." "We cannot afford to pay anyone," Violet said flatly. "Tell him to leave." "He says he will work for food and a place to sleep in the barn," her mother continued. "He seems sincere, Violet, and we do need the help." Violet wanted to argue, but she knew her mother was right. Thomas was exhausted, doing the work of 2 or 3 men, and winter would be coming before long. They needed to prepare, to make sure the cattle were ready, to stock up supplies. With a reluctant nod, she agreed. She did not meet Zachary properly until 3 days later. Her mother had carried her to the porch that morning, settling her into the old rocking chair that had belonged to her father. It was humiliating, being carried like a child, but Violet was tired of staring at the same 4 walls. She had a blanket over her useless legs and a book in her lap, though she found herself staring at the same page for long minutes without really seeing the words. Zachary came walking up from the barn, and Violet got her first good look at him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean, muscled build that came from years of hard physical work. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell to just above his collar. He wore a worn hat, dusty boots, and clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well maintained. When he removed his hat and looked up at the porch, Violet found herself staring into the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. "Miss Gardner," he said, his voice respectful. "I am Zachary Vaughn. It is good to finally meet you properly. Mr. Vaughn, Violet replied, keeping her tone neutral. My mother tells me you have been a great help these past few days. Just doing what needs doing, he said. Your brother is a hard worker, but this ranch is too much for one person. There was no pity in his eyes when he looked at her, which Violet found both surprising and refreshing. Most people who had visited in those first weeks had looked at her with such overwhelming sympathy that it made her want to scream. Zachary simply looked at her as if she were any other person, and something about that made her shoulders relax slightly. Well, I appreciate the help, she said. Though I am not sure how long we can sustain another mouth to feed. I do not eat much, Zachary said with a slight smile, and I am hoping to earn enough eventually to move on. I am making my way to California, but I ran into some trouble in Denver and lost most of my savings. Figured I would work my way west bit by bit. What kind of trouble? Violet asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was not her business, but Zachary did not seem offended. The gambling kind, he admitted. I am not proud of it, but I learned my lesson. Now I stick to honest work and save every penny. Over the following days, Violet found herself watching Zachary more than she cared to admit. He worked from dawn until dusk, helping Thomas with everything from mending fences to breaking a new horse. He was patient and skilled, and he had a way with animals that impressed even Violet, who had grown up around livestock. The horses seemed to trust him instinctively, and even their most temperamental mare calmed under his touch. Her mother carried her to the porch most mornings, and Violet would spend hours there, sometimes with her sewing or a book, but often just watching the work of the ranch continue without her. It was a bitter feeling, being so removed from something that had been her entire life. She had loved working the land, riding out to check on the cattle, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. Now she was trapped in a body that would not obey her, dependent on others for the most basic needs. One evening, about 2 weeks after Zachary had arrived, a storm rolled in fast over the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly, and rain began to pour down in thick sheets. Violet was still on the porch, having lost track of time while reading, and suddenly she was being drenched. She tried to wheel herself toward the door in the chair her mother had borrowed from a neighbor, but one of the wheels caught on a loose board and the chair tipped sideways. Violet cried out as she fell, landing hard on the wooden planks, unable to catch herself properly. Within seconds, Zachary was there. He had been running from the barn, and he scooped her up from the ground as if she weighed nothing at all. Violet found herself pressed against his chest, his arms strong and secure around her, as he carried her quickly into the house. He was soaked through, his shirt clinging to him, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, setting her gently on the settee in the front room. "No, I am fine," Violet said, though she was shaking. "Thank you. I should have come inside sooner." Her mother rushed in with towels, fussing over both of them. Zachary tried to leave, saying he needed to get back to the barn, but Sarah insisted he stay until the worst of the storm passed. He sat in a chair near the fireplace, looking somewhat uncomfortable, while Sarah brought him coffee and made sure Violet was warm and dry. That night, lying in bed, Violet could not stop thinking about the way Zachary had lifted her so easily, so carefully. There had been no hesitation, no awkwardness. He had simply acted, getting her to safety. It had been a long time since anyone besides her mother had touched her with such care, and the memory of it made something in her chest ache in a way she could not quite name. The days grew shorter as September arrived, and the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. Zachary proved himself invaluable, and even Violet had to admit that they would have been in serious trouble without him. He fixed the roof on the barn, reinforce the fences, and help Thomas drive the cattle to better grazing land. He was up before dawn and worked until well after dark, never complaining, never asking for more than he had been promised. Violet had started to venture out more, letting her mother or Thomas carry her to different spots around the ranch. She hated being so dependent, but she also could not stand being cooped up inside any longer. One afternoon, she asked Thomas to take her down to the barn. She wanted to see the horses, to feel like she was still part of the ranch in some small way. Thomas settled her on a stool near the stalls, and Violet breathed in the familiar smell of hay and horses. It was comforting in a way that surprised her. She had thought being here would make her sadness worse, but instead it felt like coming home. Zachary came into the barn a few minutes later, leading the mare they called Dancer. He paused when he saw Violet, then nodded in greeting. "Miss Gardner," he said, "nice to see you down here." "I was going stir-crazy in the house," Violet admitted. "I needed to be around the horses again." Zachary began brushing Dancer, his movements smooth and practiced. "They are fine animals," he said. "You have done well with them." "My father had an eye for good horses," Violet said. "I just tried to continue what he started." They fell into a comfortable silence, with only the sound of the brush against the horse's coat and the occasional stamp of hooves. Violet found herself studying Zachary's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes as he worked. There was something solid about him, something steady and reliable that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before the shooting. "Can I ask you something?" Violet said suddenly. "Of course," Zachary replied, glancing over at her. "Why do you not look at me the way everyone else does? With pity, I mean." Zachary paused in his brushing, considering the question. "I suppose because I do not pity you," he said honestly. "You got dealt a bad hand, that is true, but you are still here, still fighting. That takes strength, not weakness. I have known plenty of people who gave up after far less." Violet felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Most people treat me like I am made of glass now," she said quietly, "or like I am already dead, just waiting for my body to figure it out." "Then most people are fools," Zachary said simply. He returned to brushing Dancer, but Violet could see a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. That conversation marked a shift between them. Zachary began spending more time talking with Violet when his work allowed. Sometimes he would come to the porch in the evening, and they would discuss everything from the ranch to books to their childhoods. Violet learned that Zachary had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. His father had been a farmer, but the land had been poor and the family had struggled. Zachary had left home at 16 to find his own way, working cattle drives and ranches across the West. "What made you want to go to California?" Violet asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "Heard there are opportunities there," Zachary said. "Land is still cheap in some places, if you know where to look. I have been saving for years to buy my own ranch, someplace I can build something permanent." "That sounds like a good dream," Violet said, and she meant it, even as she felt a strange pang at the thought of Zachary leaving. "What about you?" Zachary asked. "What were your dreams before?" Violet was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to expand the ranch," she said finally. "Buy more land, increase the herd, make it into something really successful, something that could support not just my family but provide jobs for others. I wanted to prove that a woman could run a ranch as well as any man." She laughed bitterly. "Seems foolish now." "It is not foolish," Zachary said firmly. "And who says you cannot still do it?" Violet gestured to her legs. "I cannot even walk, Zachary. How am I supposed to run a ranch? You have a good mind, do you not? You know cattle and horses and land better than most men I have met. Running a ranch is not just about being able to sit in a saddle. It is about making smart decisions, knowing when to buy and sell, understanding your animals and your land. You can still do all of that." Violet stared at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. No one had talked to her like this since the shooting, treating her dreams as if they were still possible. "I would need help," she said slowly. "A lot of help." "You have Thomas," Zachary pointed out, "and your mother is no fool either, and for now you have me." "For now," Violet repeated, and the words felt heavier than they should. October brought colder weather and the first hints of snow on the mountain peaks. The cattle were moved to the lower pastures, and preparations for winter became urgent. Violet had begun to take a more active role in running the ranch, making decisions and keeping the books, even if she could not physically do the work herself. It helped, having purpose again, but there were still dark moments when the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. One of those moments came on a particularly difficult morning. Violet had woken early, needing to use the chamber pot, and had tried to transfer herself from the bed. She had been practicing, trying to build strength in her arms, but this morning something went wrong. She lost her balance and fell hard to the floor, unable to stop herself. The pain in her hip was immediate and sharp, and worse than the pain was the humiliation. Her mother heard the crash and came running, but it was Zachary who appeared in the doorway moments later. He took in the situation immediately and, without waiting for permission, came into the room and lifted Violet back into bed. "I am sorry," Violet said, tears streaming down her face. She could not stop them, even though she hated crying in front of anyone. "I am so sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," Zachary said gently. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, ignoring Sarah's attempts to shoo him out. "This is hard, I know, but you are getting stronger every day, I see it." "I am useless," Violet sobbed. "I cannot even move myself from my bed without falling. What kind of life is this?" Zachary reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly. "You listen to me," he said, his green eyes intense. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Yes, your body is not doing what you want it to do right now, but you are still here, still trying, still fighting. That matters, Violet. That matters more than you know." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about hearing it in his voice made her cry harder, though the tears felt different now. Less despairing, somehow. From that day on, something changed between them. The formality dropped away, and they became simply Violet and Zachary to each other. He began helping her with exercises Doc Pritchard had suggested, supporting her legs and helping her try to build muscle even though she could not feel or control them. It was frustrating, exhausting work, but Zachary never lost patience, never made her feel like she was asking too much. He also started carrying her more often. At first it was just practical things, taking her from the house to the porch or down to the barn. But gradually, it became part of their daily routine. Every morning, Zachary would come to the house after his first round of chores, and he would carry Violet to wherever she wanted to be that day. Sometimes it was the porch, sometimes the barn, occasionally down to the creek that ran through the property. Violet found herself looking forward to those moments more than she cared to admit. Being in Zachary's arms made her feel safe and cared for in a way she had not experienced since her father died. He was always so careful with her, making sure she was comfortable, asking if she was warm enough or if she needed anything. And the way he looked at her, with respect and something else she could not quite name, made her heart beat faster. One morning in late October, Zachary carried her down to the creek. The autumn leaves were brilliant shades of gold and red, and the water sparkled in the early sunlight. He settled her on a large, flat rock near the water's edge and sat down beside her. "This is beautiful," Violet said, breathing in the crisp morning air. "Reminds me of a place back in Missouri," Zachary said. "My brothers and I used to fish in a creek like this. Seems like a lifetime ago now." "Do you miss them?" Violet asked. "Your family?" Zachary nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but we were never particularly close. Too many of us, not enough food or money. Everyone was always fighting for scraps, both literally and figuratively. I think my parents were relieved when I left. One less mouth to feed." "That sounds lonely," Violet said softly. "It was," Zachary admitted. "For a long time I just drifted from place to place, never putting down roots. Told myself I liked it that way, being free to go wherever I wanted. But the truth is, I think I was just afraid of trying to build something and losing it." "And now," Violet asked, "are you still afraid?" Zachary turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Now I think maybe some things are worth the risk," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a while after that, watching the water flow past. Violet's heart was pounding, and she could feel a flush spreading across her cheeks. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge what felt like it was growing between them, but she did not know how to find the words. November arrived with the first real snow, and the ranch settled into the slower rhythm of winter. The cattle were in the lower pastures where they could be fed easily, and much of the work became about maintenance and preparation for the harsh months ahead. Violet continued to work on the ranch's books and make decisions, but she also spent more time with Zachary, talking and laughing and discovering all the small details that made up a person's life. She learned that he had a deep love of reading, but had not owned more than 2 or 3 books in his entire life because he moved around so much. Violet lent him books from her father's small collection, and they would discuss them in the evenings. She learned that he had a talent for carving wood, and he made her a small horse figurine that she kept on the table beside her bed. She learned that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a cattle stampede years ago, and that he could play the harmonica, though he rarely did. And with each piece of information, each shared moment, Violet felt herself falling deeper into something she had never expected to feel again. Love, she realized one night as she lay in bed thinking of Zachary's smile. She was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her. What could she possibly offer him? She was trapped in a wheelchair or dependent on others to carry her. She could not dance with him, could not walk beside him, could not do so many of the things that a wife should be able to do. He had dreams of his own ranch in California, and she could not imagine how she would fit into that dream as anything other than a burden. But despite her fears, she could not stop her heart from wanting what it wanted. And more, she caught Zachary looking at her with an expression that made her think maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way. The first major snowstorm hit in mid-November, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the ranch overnight. Zachary and Thomas worked tirelessly to make sure the animals were safe and fed, and Violet watched anxiously from the window, wrapped in blankets. When Zachary finally came in that evening, he was half frozen, his lips tinged blue and his hands shaking with cold. Sarah immediately set about warming him up, bringing hot coffee and making him sit by the fire. Violet wheeled herself as close as she could get, wishing desperately that she could do more to help. She felt so useless, sitting there while he had been out risking his health for their ranch. "You should have come in sooner," Violet said, her voice sharper than she intended because she was worried. "The cattle needed tending," Zachary said, his teeth still chattering slightly. "They are settled now. We will not lose any if the weather holds." "The cattle are not worth you freezing to death," Violet snapped. Zachary looked at her in surprise, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Are you worried about me, Violet Gardner?" Violet felt her cheeks heat. "Of course I am worried. You are. You are important to this ranch." Just to the ranch? Zachary asked, his green eyes fixed on hers. Violet's mouth went dry. Before she could answer, her mother came back with more blankets and the moment was broken. But the question hung in the air between them, unspoken but present. That night, Violet could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Zachary and everything she felt for him. She thought about the way he carried her so carefully, the way he talked to her like she was still whole, the way he made her laugh even on her darkest days. She thought about his dreams of California and wondered if there was any way those dreams could include her. The next morning, she was exhausted and out of sorts. Her mother noticed immediately and tried to fuss over her, but Violet pushed her away irritably. She hated feeling like this, so uncertain and vulnerable. She hated that she had fallen in love with a man who would inevitably leave, moving on to pursue his dreams while she remained here, stuck in her broken body. Zachary came to carry her to the porch as usual, but Violet refused. "I want to stay inside today," she said curtly. He looked surprised but did not push. "All right, can I get you anything?" "No," Violet said. "I am fine. Go do your work." She regretted the harsh tone immediately, but Zachary simply nodded and left. Violet spent the day feeling miserable, angry at herself and her situation and the whole unfair world. By evening, she knew she needed to apologize. When Zachary came in for supper, Violet asked if he would stay after to talk. He agreed, looking concerned, and once the meal was finished and her mother and Thomas had retired, they were left alone in the front room. "I am sorry for being rude this morning," Violet said quietly. "You did not deserve that." "It is all right," Zachary said. "Everyone has bad days." "It is not all right," Violet insisted. "You have been nothing but kind to me and I repaid that with rudeness. The truth is—" She paused, gathering her courage. "The truth is that I am scared." "Scared of what?" Zachary asked gently. Violet took a deep breath. "Scared of how I feel about you," she admitted. "Scared because I know you are going to leave eventually, and I am going to be left here with a broken heart on top of everything else." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved from his chair to kneel beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. "What if I did not want to leave?" he said softly. Violet's breath caught. "What?" "I have been thinking a lot lately," Zachary continued. "About my dreams, about California, about what I really want out of life. And I realized that what I want, more than any piece of land or any ranch, is to be with you." "Zachary, you cannot," Violet said, tears springing to her eyes. "I cannot give you what you deserve. I cannot walk beside you. I cannot help you build the life you want. I am just going to hold you back." "You could never hold me back," Zachary said fiercely. "Violet, you are the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I have ever met. These past few months, getting to know you, seeing your courage and your determination, it has changed me. I do not want to go to California alone. I do not want to build something alone. I want to build it with you right here on this ranch." "But your dreams," Violet whispered. "My dreams have changed," Zachary said. "You are my dream now, if you will have me." Violet was crying openly now, but they were tears of joy mixed with disbelief. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it." "I love you too," Zachary said, reaching up to cup her face with his hand. "So much that it scares me sometimes." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Violet met him halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and tentative at first, then deepening with all the emotion they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Zachary said. "Let me stay here and help you run this ranch. Let me carry you every day for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes. Just let me stay." "Yes," Violet said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming together. Zachary wanted to marry her as soon as possible, but Violet insisted they wait until spring. She wanted time to prepare, to make sure this was really what he wanted, to give him a chance to change his mind. "I am not going to change my mind," Zachary said firmly. "But if you need time, I will wait." "I would wait forever for you, Violet." When Sarah and Thomas learned of the engagement, their reactions were mixed. Sarah was overjoyed, having grown fond of Zachary and seeing how happy he made her daughter. Thomas was more skeptical, pulling Zachary aside and making it clear that if he ever hurt Violet, he would answer to him. Zachary accepted the warning gracefully, understanding that Thomas was just protecting his sister. The winter months passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Violet worked with her mother on planning the wedding, which would be small but meaningful. They would hold it at the ranch, with just a few neighbors and friends invited. Zachary threw himself into improving the ranch, working even harder than before now that it would be his home permanently. He also continued to carry Violet daily, and she found herself looking forward to those moments more than ever. Sometimes he would carry her out to see the snow-covered mountains, or to the barn to visit the horses, or simply around the ranch so she could supervise the work. Being in his arms never lost its magic, and Violet marveled at how careful and gentle he always was with her. But there was also frustration. As much as Violet tried to accept her limitations, there were moments when the reality of her situation would crash over her like a wave. She would see Zachary working in the fields and want desperately to be beside him. She would watch her mother cooking and remember how she used to love making bread, standing at the counter and kneading dough with her hands. She would dream of dancing at her own wedding and wake up crying. One particularly hard day in February, Violet was overwhelmed by a wave of grief and anger. She had dropped a book she was reading and could not reach it from her chair. Such a simple thing, but it felt like the final straw. She broke down sobbing, hating her body, hating the outlaw who had shot her, hating the unfairness of it all. Zachary found her like that and immediately gathered her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest. "I hate this," Violet sobbed. "I hate being helpless. I hate needing people to do everything for me. I hate that I cannot be the wife you deserve." "You are exactly the wife I deserve," Zachary said firmly. "And you are not helpless, Violet. You run this ranch, you make important decisions every day, you are smart and capable and strong. So you need help with some physical things. So what? Everyone needs help with something." "But you do not understand," Violet said. "I cannot even pick up a book I dropped. How am I supposed to be a partner to you? How am I supposed to be a mother someday if we want children?" "We will figure it out," Zachary said. "Together. That is what marriage is it not? Figuring things out together." His calm certainty helped, as it always did. Violet cried herself out and then felt embarrassed for breaking down. But Zachary just kissed her forehead and told her she was allowed to have bad days, that he loved her on the bad days just as much as the good ones. March brought the first signs of spring, with the snow beginning to melt and green shoots pushing up through the earth. The wedding was planned for late April, and anticipation built as the day approached. Violet had moments of doubt, worrying that Zachary would realize what he was signing up for and back out, but he never wavered. If anything, he seemed more certain with each passing day. One evening in early April, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Violet brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, "about trying to walk again." Zachary turned to her in surprise. "I thought the doctor said it was impossible." "He said I would never walk again," Violet clarified. "But maybe he was wrong. Maybe if I work hard enough, build enough strength, maybe I could at least stand. Maybe I could take a few steps. I do not know, but I want to try." "What brought this on?" Zachary asked carefully, Violet took a deep breath. "I want to walk down the aisle to you at our wedding," she said. "Even if it is just a few steps, even if someone has to support me the whole way, I want to try. I need to try, Zachary. I need to prove to myself that I have not given up completely." Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking. "It will be hard," he said finally, "and painful, and there is no guarantee it will work." "I know," Violet said, "but I want to try anyway." "Then I will help you," Zachary said. "Whatever you need." They started the next day. Zachary helped Violet try to stand, supporting her weight while she tried to lock her legs in place. At first, nothing happened. Her legs simply hung useless, unable to bear any weight, but Violet refused to give up. Day after day, they practiced. Zachary would hold her up while she tried with everything she had to make her legs respond. Doc Pritchard came out to the ranch when he heard what they were attempting. He examined Violet again and shook his head doubtfully. "The damage to your spine was severe," he said. "I admire your determination, but I do not want you to get your hopes up unrealistically." "I am not asking you to give me hope," Violet said. "I am just asking you to tell me if what I am doing could hurt me worse." The doctor sighed. "As long as you are careful and do not push too hard too fast, you should not cause additional damage. But Miss Gardner, I truly do not believe you will regain the ability to walk." Violet thanked him for his honesty, but continued with her efforts anyway. Thomas helped build parallel bars in the barn, similar to ones Doc Pritchard had seen used in a hospital back east. Violet would pull herself between the bars while Zachary supported her legs, trying over and over to make them hold her weight. Progress was minimal. After 2 weeks, Violet could sometimes lock her knees for a few seconds before they buckled. After 3 weeks, she could occasionally shift her weight from one leg to the other with heavy support. It was frustrating, exhausting work, and there were many times when Violet wanted to quit. But Zachary was always there, encouraging her, believing in her even when she did not believe in herself. "You are stronger than you were a month ago," he would tell her. "That is progress, even if it does not feel like much." The wedding was only 2 weeks away when Violet managed something new. She was between the parallel bars with Zachary behind her, his arms around her waist for support. She was trying to take a step, something they had attempted dozens of times with no success. But this time, something was different. She felt a flicker of sensation in her right leg, the faintest ghost of feeling, and when she tried to move it, it actually shifted forward a few inches. "Did you see that?" Violet gasped. "Did you see it move?" "I saw it," Zachary said, his voice filled with excitement. "Do it again." Violet tried, concentrating with everything she had. The leg moved again, a clumsy, dragging step, but a step nonetheless. Violet started crying, overwhelmed with emotion. It was not much, barely anything really, but it was more than she had been able to do in 9 months. Over the next 2 weeks, Violet practiced relentlessly. The sensation in her legs remained mostly absent, but she was learning to move them through sheer force of will and muscle memory. She could take 3 or 4 shuffling steps now before her legs gave out completely. It was nowhere near enough to walk down an aisle, but it was something. The night before the wedding, Violet lay in bed, unable to sleep. Tomorrow she would marry Zachary, the man who had come into her life when she needed him most and had refused to give up on her. The man who had carried her daily, who had helped her try to walk again, who loved her despite everything. She was the luckiest woman alive, she thought, even with all her limitations. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a warm spring breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Sarah helped Violet dress in a simple but lovely cream-colored dress that they had modified to work with her wheelchair. Violet's hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through it, and she wore her mother's pearls. When it was time, Thomas came to carry her to the spot where they would hold the ceremony, a flat area near the creek where Zachary had first told her he loved her. But Violet stopped him. "Wait," she said. "I want to try something." She had Zachary come to the house instead. He looked handsome in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his green eyes bright with anticipation. When he saw Violet, his breath caught. "You are beautiful," he said reverently. "Help me up," Violet said. Zachary understood immediately. He helped her out of the wheelchair and supported her weight, letting her get her balance. The few guests, gathered by the creek, turned to watch as Violet and Zachary slowly made their way from the house. Violet took one step, her leg dragging slightly. Then another. Zachary held her securely, taking most of her weight, but her legs were moving, carrying her forward. The distance was not far, maybe 30 feet, but to Violet it felt like a mile. Her muscles screamed with the effort, and she could feel herself shaking with exertion, but she kept going. One step. Another. The guests were watching in stunned silence. Sarah had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Thomas looked like he might cry too. Doc Pritchard, who had been invited despite his pessimism, stood with his mouth hanging open in disbelief. 15 feet. 20. 25. Violet's legs were giving out, she could feel it. She would not make it all the way. But just before they buckled completely, they reached the spot where the ceremony would take place. Zachary carefully supported her as she transferred her weight to a sturdy chair they had positioned there, and the guests burst into applause. "You did it," Zachary whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I am so proud of you." The ceremony was beautiful and brief. The circuit preacher, a kind man named Reverend Matthews who traveled between the small towns in the area, spoke about love and commitment and partnership. Violet and Zachary exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other through whatever challenges life brought, to be partners in every sense of the word, to love each other until their last breaths. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Violet with such tenderness and joy that she felt like her heart might burst. They were married. They were actually married. The reception was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing. Violet watched from her chair as the guests celebrated, feeling more content than she had in years. Zachary stayed close to her side, holding her hand and making sure she had everything she needed. When the sun began to set and the guests started to leave, Zachary carried Violet back to the house. They had discussed where they would live, and Violet had insisted that Zachary move into her room rather than her trying to move elsewhere. It was on the ground floor and had been modified with things to make her life easier. That night, as Zachary held her close in the darkness, Violet felt a peace settle over her that she had not known was possible. She was married to a man who loved her completely, not despite her limitations but including them. She had walked, however briefly, after being told it was impossible. Her ranch was doing well, and they had plans to expand it together. Life was not perfect, but it was good. Very good. The weeks and months that followed were full of hard work and adjustment. Violet and Zachary fell into a rhythm of partnership, working together to run the ranch. Violet handled the business side, keeping the books, making purchasing decisions, and planning for the future. Zachary handled more of the physical work, though Thomas was becoming increasingly capable and reliable as he matured. Violet continued to practice walking, pushing herself a little further each day. By summer, she could walk with heavy support for short distances, though she still relied primarily on her wheelchair for mobility. It was frustrating at times, but also deeply satisfying to see improvement, however slow. She and Zachary also grew closer emotionally, learning the rhythms of married life and discovering new depths to their relationship. Zachary remained endlessly patient with her, helping her with the physical tasks she could not manage on her own, and never making her feel like a burden. And Violet worked hard to be the best partner she could be, offering him her strength and intelligence and love in return. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Violet brought up something that had been on her mind. "I have been thinking about children," she said carefully. Zachary turned to her. "What about them?" "I want them," Violet said. "I know it might be complicated, given my situation, but I want to have a family with you." Zachary smiled and kissed her softly. "I want that too," he said. "Whatever challenges come with it, we will face them together." By autumn, Violet was pregnant. Doc Pritchard was concerned, warning her that pregnancy and childbirth could be more difficult given her spinal injury, but Violet was determined. She felt wonderful, actually, with none of the morning sickness that plagued some women. As her belly grew, so did her happiness. Zachary was attentive and devoted, even more protective than usual. He worried constantly that she was doing too much, that she was not resting enough. Violet found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, having to remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. The winter was mild that year, and the ranch prospered. They were able to buy additional cattle and some more land from a neighbor who was retiring. Thomas had grown into a capable young man, and they hired an additional ranch hand to help with the workload. The future looked bright. Violet's son was born on a warm day in May 1880, almost exactly 2 years after the shooting that had changed her life. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Doc Pritchard looked genuinely worried, but in the end, both mother and baby came through healthy. They named him Zachary Henry Vaughn, after his father and Violet's late father Henry. Holding her son for the first time, Violet was overwhelmed with emotion. She had thought she might never have this, never hold her own child. But here he was, perfect and real, with his father's green eyes and a shock of dark hair. Zachary sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with wonder. "We made this," he said softly. "This incredible little person." "We did," Violet agreed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Being a mother with limited mobility presented challenges, but Violet refused to let it stop her. They modified a low table in the nursery where she could change and dress the baby while seated. Sarah was an enormous help in those first months, showing Violet how to care for an infant and stepping in when the physical demands were too much. And Zachary was a devoted father, waking for nighttime feedings and carrying the baby to Violet whenever she needed him. Little Zachary, who they called Henry to avoid confusion, was a happy, healthy baby. He grew quickly, hitting all his milestones on time or early. By the time he was 6 months old, he was sitting up on his own and fascinated by everything around him. The ranch continued to thrive. Zachary had a gift for working with horses, and they started breeding and training them in addition to running cattle. It became a profitable side business, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to purchase their horses. Violet handled all the negotiations and sales, proving herself to be a shrewd businesswoman. By the time Henry was a year old, Violet had regained more mobility in her legs. She still could not walk unassisted, but she could stand for longer periods and take several steps with the support of canes or Zachary's arm. It was progress, slow and hard-won, but real. One afternoon in autumn, when Henry was nearly 18 months old, something remarkable happened. Violet was practicing walking in the barn, using the parallel bars they had built years earlier. Henry was playing nearby, watched by Sarah. Violet was concentrating on taking steps, her face set with determination, when Henry suddenly pulled himself up on the bars and took his first unsteady steps. "Look," Sarah cried out. "He is walking." Violet stopped what she was doing and watched as her son toddled toward her, his face bright with delight at this new skill. He made it 3 steps before falling onto his bottom, then immediately tried again. Watching him, Violet felt a complex mix of emotions, joy at seeing this milestone, but also a pang of something like grief. That evening, after Henry was asleep, Violet found herself crying. Zachary discovered her on the porch and immediately wrapped his arms around her. "What is wrong?" he asked, concerned. "I am being foolish," Violet said, wiping at her eyes. "I am so happy that Henry is walking. But watching him, seeing how easy it is for him, it just reminded me of everything I lost. He will run and jump and climb, and I will never be able to keep up with him." "You will keep up with him in all the ways that matter," Zachary said firmly. "You will teach him to read and to think and to be kind. You will show him how to be strong in the face of adversity. He will grow up knowing that his mother refused to give up, even when life dealt her an impossible hand. That is worth more than being able to chase him around a yard." Violet knew he was right, but the grief was still there. She let herself feel it, let herself mourn what she had lost, and then she moved forward. Because that was what she did. That was who she was. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. Violet continued to regain small amounts of mobility, though she never walked normally again. By the time Henry was 3, she could walk short distances with forearm crutches, though she still relied on her wheelchair for longer trips. It was enough, though. It had to be enough. They had a second child when Henry was 4, a daughter they named Victoria Grace, after Violet and a grandmother Zachary barely remembered. Victoria was a spirited, determined child who adored her older brother and had no fear of anything. Watching her children grow filled Violet with a joy she had never imagined possible. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the area. They now ran several hundred head of cattle, and their horse breeding program was well known across Colorado. Thomas had married and built his own house on the property, working as a full partner in the ranch operations. They employed several hands year-round, providing good jobs for local men. Violet had proven, beyond any doubt, that she could run a ranch as well as any man. Better than most, actually. Her reputation for fairness and business acumen spread, and people came to her for advice. She became a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and organizing charitable efforts for those in need. But more than any professional success, Violet treasured her family. Zachary remained the center of her world, her partner in every sense. He still carried her when she needed it, though now it was often just for the joy of being close rather than out of necessity. They would sit on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, talking about their days and making plans for the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Violet asked one night. "Giving up your dreams of California?" Zachary pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Not for a single second," he said. "You were always the dream, Violet. Everything else was just details." On a warm evening in June 1889, 11 years after the shooting that had changed everything, the Vaughn family gathered on the porch of their ranch house. Henry, now 9 years old, was reading to his 5-year-old sister Victoria from a book of adventure stories. Sarah, now in her 60s but still sharp and active, was shelling peas. Thomas and his wife were visiting with their 2 children, who were playing in the yard. Zachary sat beside Violet, their hands intertwined. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Looking around at her family, at the ranch she and Zachary had built together, Violet felt a profound sense of gratitude and contentment. The shooting had stolen so much from her. Her ability to walk freely, her independence in many ways, her sense of security in the world. But it had also, in a strange way, given her this. It had brought Zachary into her life. It had taught her strength she had not known she possessed. It had shown her that love could exist even in the most difficult circumstances. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked softly. "How lucky I am," Violet said simply. Zachary smiled and kissed her, a gesture of love that had become so familiar over the years but never lost its magic. "I am the lucky one," he said. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. Doc Pritchard had been wrong. She had not walked again in the way he meant, not completely. But she had proven him wrong in every way that mattered. She had built a life, a family, a legacy. She had loved and been loved in return. The ranch would continue to grow in the years to come. Henry would eventually take over operations, with his sister Victoria working alongside him, breaking barriers as a woman actively managing a major cattle operation. But that was still in the future. For now, on this perfect evening, Violet was exactly where she wanted to be. Surrounded by family, her husband's hand warm in hers, watching her children play and laugh. The little girl who had been told she would never walk again had walked farther than anyone could have imagined, just not always on her own 2 feet. Sometimes she had walked in Zachary's arms. Sometimes she had walked with crutches or canes. Sometimes she had rolled in her chair with her head held high. But she had always moved forward, never giving up, never letting the limitations of her body limit the scope of her dreams. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not whether she could walk in the conventional sense, but whether she had lived fully despite her challenges. And looking at her husband, her children, her thriving ranch, Violet knew without doubt that she had done exactly that. "Mama, come play with us," Victoria called from the yard. Zachary stood immediately, ready to carry Violet to wherever her daughter wanted her. But Violet surprised him by reaching for her crutches instead. She had been practicing, pushing herself a little further each day, and tonight she felt strong. "I want to walk," she said. Zachary helped her stand, staying close in case she needed support. Slowly, carefully, Violet made her way down the porch steps and into the yard. It took several minutes to cover what would have been a 30-second walk for someone else, but she made it. When she reached her daughter, Victoria threw her arms around her mother's waist, hugging her tightly. "You walked all by yourself," Victoria said excitedly. "I did," Violet agreed, though she knew Zachary's steady presence behind her had made it possible. She never truly walked alone anymore. But that was all right. Love meant letting people carry you sometimes, and carrying them in return when they needed it. The evening wore on, full of laughter and joy and the comfortable companionship of family. When it was time to put the children to bed, Zachary carried Violet back to the house, just as he had done countless times before. But this time, Violet thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl lying on the boardwalk 11 years ago, bleeding and broken. Doc Pritchard had been so certain. "You will never walk again," he had said with finality, but he had not accounted for love. He had not accounted for determination. He had not accounted for a cowboy named Zachary Vaughn who would carry her daily until she proved them all wrong. And she had proven them wrong in ways large and small, day after day, year after year. Not by walking perfectly, but by living fully. Not by denying her limitations, but by refusing to let them define her. Not by doing it alone, but by building a partnership with someone who loved her enough to carry her when she needed it, and stand back when she wanted to fly on her own. As Zachary tucked her into bed that night and climbed in beside her, pulling her close, Violet whispered the words she tried to say every day. I love you. Thank you for never giving up on me." "Never," Zachary promised, just as he always did. "Not in this life or the next." "You are stuck with me, Violet Vaughn." "Good," Violet said, smiling in the darkness. "That is exactly how I want it." Outside, the Colorado night was peaceful and quiet. The ranch slept, cattle settled in the pastures, horses dozing in the barn, all the work of the day complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But for now, there was just this. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful together, who had proven that love could overcome any obstacle. The doctor had said she would never walk again, and in the strictest sense, perhaps he had been right. But Violet had walked through life with grace and courage, carried when she needed to be, standing on her own when she could, always moving forward. She had walked into motherhood, into business success, into a love story that would last a lifetime. And every step of that journey, whether on her own feet or in the arms of the man she loved, had been worth it. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and family expanding. By 1895, Henry was 15 and already showing the leadership qualities that would make him an excellent ranch manager someday. Victoria, at 11, could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and had a natural way with horses that reminded everyone of her father. The ranch had grown substantially. They now owned over 2,000 acres, ran 500 head of cattle, and their horse breeding program was known throughout the West. Violet handled all the business operations from a beautiful office they had built onto the house, complete with large windows overlooking the mountains and a specially designed desk that accommodated her wheelchair. Zachary, now in his mid-40s, had silver threading through his dark hair, but remained as strong and devoted as ever. He still carried Violet when she needed it, though she had regained enough mobility over the years that she could move around the house independently with her crutches on good days. They had long since stopped thinking of her limitations as obstacles and simply saw them as part of life, something to work around rather than be defeated by. Sarah had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years earlier, surrounded by family. It had been a difficult loss for everyone, but particularly for Violet, who had relied on her mother's support and wisdom for so long. But Sarah had lived to see her grandchildren growing strong and her daughter thriving, and Violet found comfort in that. Thomas and his wife had 4 children now, and the extended family remained close, gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays. The ranch supported all of them comfortably, a testament to years of hard work and smart decisions. One spring morning, Violet was working in her office when Doc Pritchard arrived at the ranch. He was elderly now, well into his 70s, and planning to retire soon. He had asked to visit, saying he wanted to check on an old patient, and Violet had been both surprised and curious. Zachary showed him into the office, and the old doctor stood for a long moment, looking around at the evidence of Violet's success. The organized ledgers, the correspondence with buyers and sellers, the maps showing their expanded holdings. His eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said formally, "thank you for seeing me." "Of course, doctor," Violet said warmly. "Please sit down. Can I offer you some coffee?" They made small talk for a few minutes, discussing his retirement plans and the health of various people in town. But eventually, Doc Pritchard cleared his throat and got to the reason for his visit. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "one that is 17 years overdue." Violet looked at him in surprise. "An apology for what?" "For giving up on you," the doctor said. "When I told you that you would never walk again, I was speaking from medical knowledge and experience. but I was also taking away your hope, and that was wrong. I should have said that it was unlikely, that it would be difficult, but that the human spirit is capable of remarkable things. Instead, I was absolute in my pronouncement, and I nearly crushed your determination before it had a chance to flourish. Violet was quiet for a moment, thinking about those dark early days after the shooting. "You were not wrong," she said finally. "Not really. I did not walk again, not the way you meant it. I still need assistance, still use a wheelchair for most things." "But you walk," Doc Pritchard insisted. "Perhaps not in the conventional sense, but you have moved through this world with more grace and strength than most able-bodied people I have known. You built this ranch, raised a family, became a respected businesswoman. You proved that disability does not mean inability. And I wanted to tell you before I retire and possibly before I die that you have taught me something important. You taught me never to underestimate the power of determination and love." Violet felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know. And for what it is worth, I never blamed you. You gave me the truth as you understood it. What I did with that truth was up to me." The doctor left shortly after, but his words stayed with Violet for days. She had not realized how much she needed to hear them, how much she had been carrying the weight of his pronouncement all these years, even as she defied it. That evening, she told Zachary about the visit. They were in their favorite spot on the porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "He was right, you know," Zachary said thoughtfully. "About determination and love. I think love is what made the real difference. Not just my love for you, but your love for your family, for this ranch, for life itself. You never stopped fighting because you never stopped loving." Violet turned to look at her husband, this man who had stood beside her through everything. There were lines on his face now, marks of years and weather and hard work, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, actually, because now she knew the depth of his character, the steadiness of his devotion. "And I never stopped loving you," she said. "From those early days when you carried me everywhere to now, you have been my strength, my partner, my heart. I could not have done any of this without you." "We did it together," Zachary corrected gently. "That is what matters." As summer turned to autumn in 1895, the ranch prepared for roundup and all the work that entailed. Henry was old enough now to participate fully, and he showed natural leadership ability that made both his parents proud. Victoria, not to be left out, insisted on helping too and proved to be an excellent hand despite her youth. Violet watched from her specially modified wagon as the roundup proceeded. Zachary had built it years ago with a comfortable seat and good visibility, allowing her to participate in ranch activities even when she could not be on horseback. She could observe the work, make decisions, and feel like she was truly part of the operation. One evening during the roundup, as the hands gathered around the campfire for dinner, one of the younger cowboys asked Violet how she had ended up running such a successful ranch given her circumstances. It was an impertinent question, and several of the older hands started to reprimand him, but Violet held up a hand. "It is a fair question," she said, "and the answer is simple. I refuse to accept that my life was over just because my legs did not work properly anymore. I had help, of course. My husband, my family, good people who believed in me. But mostly I just kept going. I got up every day and did what needed to be done, and slowly, day by day, I built something worth having." The young cowboy nodded thoughtfully. "That takes courage," he said. "No," Violet disagreed. "Courage is doing something brave once. What I did was just stubbornness. I was too stubborn to quit, too stubborn to let one bullet define my entire life, and eventually stubbornness turned into strength. Zachary, sitting beside her, took her hand and squeezed it gently. They had had many conversations over the years about her journey, about what it had taken to rebuild her life. He understood better than anyone the daily challenges she faced, the moments of frustration and grief that she hid from most people. But he also saw her triumphs, celebrated her victories, and loved her through all of it. The roundup was successful, yielding a strong count of healthy cattle that would fetch good prices at market. As the crew prepared to drive the cattle to the railroad in Denver, Zachary made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Henry will lead the drive this year," he said. "I am staying here." There was a moment of shocked silence. Zachary had led every cattle drive for the past 17 years. But Henry quickly composed himself and accepted the responsibility with a maturity that made Violet's heart swell with pride. After the crew had left with the cattle, Violet asked Zachary why he had stayed behind. "Because I wanted to be here with you," he said simply. "Henry is ready to take on more responsibility, and I realize that I have spent so much time working that I have missed opportunities to just be with you. We are not getting any younger, Violet. I want to spend my time wisely." They spent the weeks while Henry was away working together on ranch projects and simply enjoying each other's company. Zachary built Violet a new garden plot that was raised so she could tend it from her wheelchair, and they spent peaceful hours planting vegetables and flowers. They rode out to different parts of the ranch in the modified wagon, checking on pastures and fences and just appreciating the land they had built together. One afternoon, they rode to the creek where they had been married nearly 17 years earlier. The spot looked much the same, though the trees were taller and there was a well-worn path leading to the water now. "Do you remember your wedding day?" Zachary asked, helping Violet down from the wagon and settling her in a comfortable spot near the water. "Every detail," Violet said. "How could I forget? I walked to you that day, even though everyone said I never would. That was the moment I knew for certain that you could do anything you set your mind to," Zachary said. "Watching you take those steps, seeing the determination on your face, I thought my heart might burst with pride and love." "I was so scared," Violet admitted. "Scared my legs would give out before I reached you, scared I would fail in front of everyone. But I kept looking at you, standing there waiting for me, and I knew I could do it. You have always been my strength, Zachary." "And you have always been mine," Zachary replied. He settled beside her, pulling her close. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the burble of the creek and the sound of birds in the trees. "I have been thinking," Violet said eventually, "about the future, about what happens when we are gone. This ranch, everything we have built, I want to make sure it continues. That it stays in the family and continues to provide for everyone. Henry will run it well," Zachary said confidently. "And Victoria too, if she wants to be involved. We have taught them everything they need to know." "I know," Violet agreed. "But I want to make sure they understand the real lesson, the important one. It is not just about running a successful business. It is about never giving up, even when things seem impossible. It is about partnership and love and determination. It is about carrying each other through the hard times." Zachary pulled her even closer. "They understand," he said. "They see it every day in how we live our lives. You have given them the greatest gift possible, an example of what it means to face adversity with grace and courage." Henry returned from the cattle drive 3 weeks later, successful and confident. He had gotten excellent prices for their stock and had handled several difficult situations with maturity and good judgment. Watching him report to his parents about the trip, both Violet and Zachary felt the pride of knowing their son was ready to take on more responsibility. Victoria, meanwhile, had been working with the horses while they were gone, and had successfully trained a young stallion that everyone else had said was too wild to be useful. She was only 11, but already showing the same stubborn determination that had always characterized her mother. As the years continued to pass, the rhythm of life on the ranch became even more established. By 1900, as the new century began, the Vaughn Ranch was one of the largest and most successful operations in western Colorado. Henry, now 20, was handling most of the day-to-day operations, and Violet had shifted into more of an advisory role, though she still kept the books and made major business decisions. Victoria, at 16, had become an accomplished horsewoman and was working full-time on the ranch, despite Violet's attempts to encourage her to pursue more education. "The ranch is my education," Victoria would say. "Everything I need to know I am learning here." Zachary was 52 now, his dark hair heavily silvered, but he remained strong and active. He still carried Violet when she needed it, still sat with her on the porch every evening, still loved her with the same intensity he had from the beginning. One significant change came in 1901, when Thomas decided to take his family and move to California to start his own ranch. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to her brother and his family, but Violet understood the desire to build something of your own. They parted with promises to write often and visit when possible. That same year, Henry married a young woman from Montrose named Elizabeth Gray. She was smart and capable, and Violet liked her immediately. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Violet managed to walk down the aisle with Zachary's support to give her blessing to the couple. It was not easy, and it took longer than it should have, but she did it, just as she had walked to her own wedding all those years ago. Henry and Elizabeth built a house on the ranch property, and Violet delighted in watching them start their life together. When Elizabeth became pregnant a year later, Violet was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Her grandson, James, was born in early 1903, and holding him for the first time brought back all the emotions Violet had felt when her own children were born. The miracle of new life, the hope for the future, the overwhelming love that came with welcoming a new generation. Zachary was a devoted grandfather, just as he had been a devoted father. He would carry little James around the ranch, showing him animals and telling him stories, and Violet would watch with a full heart. This was legacy, she thought. Not just the land and the cattle and the success, but the love passed down from generation to generation. Victoria showed no signs of settling down, much to Violet's occasional concern. At 19, she was fiercely independent and totally focused on the ranch. She had become an expert horse trainer, and buyers came from across the region specifically to purchase horses she had trained. Violet worried sometimes that Victoria was too much like her, too determined to prove herself, but she also recognized that her daughter needed to find her own path. By 1905, Violet was 51 years old and had lived nearly half her life since the shooting that changed everything. She had more aches and pains now, and some days her mobility was worse than others, but she had long since made peace with her body's limitations. She had accomplished more in her life than most able-bodied people ever dreamed of, and she was proud of what she had built. One evening that summer, as she and Zachary sat on the porch watching the sunset, Violet brought up something that had been on her mind. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had gone to California like you planned?" she asked. "If you had never stopped at our ranch that day?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Sometimes," he admitted, but only to realize how empty that life would have been compared to this. "I might have had land, maybe even success, but I would not have had you. I would not have had Henry and Victoria. I would not have had this family, this home, this life." and that would have been a tragedy far greater than never reaching California. "I am glad you stayed," Violet said softly. "I am glad you chose me, chose us, even though it meant giving up your dreams." "I did not give up my dreams," Zachary corrected. "My dreams changed. They evolved into something better than I ever could have imagined. You were always the dream, Violet. Everything else was just details." They had had versions of this conversation many times over the years, but it never got old. The reassurance that they had chosen each other, that they had built something worthwhile together, that love had been enough to overcome every obstacle they faced. Victoria got married in 1907, finally settling on a young rancher from Gunnison named Michael Stevens. He was quiet and hardworking, and he clearly adored Victoria. More importantly, he had no problem with the fact that she would continue working on her family's ranch and had no intention of being a traditional housewife. They built a house near Henry's, and the ranch felt even more like a true family compound. By 1910, Violet was a grandmother 4 times over, with Henry and Elizabeth's 3 children and Victoria's first baby, a daughter named Sarah after Violet's mother. Watching her grandchildren run and play around the ranch brought Violet both joy and a bittersweetness she had not fully anticipated. She saw in them all the mobility and freedom she had lost, but she also saw the future, bright and full of promise. Zachary was approaching 60, and while he remained active, he had finally agreed to step back from the hardest physical labor. Henry had taken over as the true manager of the ranch, with Victoria handling the horse breeding program and Michael helping with the cattle operations. It was a family business in every sense, and it was thriving. One morning in the spring of 1911, Violet woke feeling strange. There was a tingling in her legs that she had not felt in years, and when she tried to move them, she felt a response that startled her. She spent several minutes experimenting, moving her legs under the blankets before calling for Zachary. "Something is different," she told him excitedly. "I can feel my legs more than I have in years. I can move them more easily." Doc Pritchard's successor, a young doctor named Harris, came out to examine her. He was fascinated by the increased mobility and sensation, but could not fully explain it. "Sometimes the body heals in ways we do not understand," he said. "You have been working those muscles for over 30 years, building strength gradually. It is possible that you have developed alternative pathways in your nervous system, ways for signals to route around the damaged area in your spine. It is quite remarkable, actually." Over the following weeks, Violet worked intensively with her mobility, and the improvement continued. She would never have full function, but she could now stand and walk with just a cane for short distances, something that had not been possible for decades. It felt like a gift, this late-stage improvement, and Violet treasured it. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. By 1915, as the world moved toward a war that would change everything, the Vaughn Ranch remained a peaceful oasis. Henry and Victoria were both firmly established with their own families, and the ranch supported everyone comfortably. Violet had handed over most of the business operations to Henry by this point, serving only as an advisor when needed. She spent her days with Zachary, working in her garden, playing with her grandchildren, and simply enjoying the life they had built together. They had been married for 37 years, and every day Violet thanked whatever force had brought Zachary to her door all those years ago. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill, Zachary said something that had been on his mind. "I have been thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "When I showed up here 37 years ago, I was just a drifter looking for work. I had no family, no real home, no purpose beyond earning enough money to keep moving west. And then I met you, and everything changed. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something permanent. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. I became the man I always wanted to be because of you." Violet took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We gave those things to each other," she said. "I was broken when you met me, not just physically but in spirit. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that love could exist even in the darkest circumstances. You carried me, literally and figuratively, until I could find my own strength again. We built this life together, Zachary. Every part of it." As the sun set over the mountains they had watched together for nearly 4 decades, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Violet felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not turned out the way she had planned all those years ago, before a stray bullet changed everything. It had been harder, more challenging, filled with obstacles she had never imagined facing. But it had also been richer, deeper, more meaningful than anything she could have planned. The shooting had taken away her ability to walk easily, but it had led her to a love that transcended anything she had dreamed possible. It had taught her strength she never knew she possessed. It had shown her that disability did not mean inability, that limitations could be overcome, that love really could conquer all. The doctor had said she would never walk again, and in many ways he had been right. But in the ways that truly mattered, Violet had walked farther than anyone could have imagined. She had walked through grief and pain into love and joy. She had walked through despair into determination. She had walked through limitation into a life of incredible accomplishment. And every step of that journey, whether on her own feet or in the arms of the man she loved, had been worth it. Zachary and Violet Vaughn lived many more years together on their ranch, surrounded by family and love. When Zachary passed away peacefully in 1923 at the age of 74, Violet mourned deeply, but also felt grateful for every moment they had shared. They had had 45 years together, years filled with love and partnership and devotion. Violet lived another 5 years after Zachary's death, remaining sharp and active until the end. She passed away in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 74, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The Vaughn Ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management, and it remains in the family to this day, a testament to the legacy of a woman who refused to give up and a man who loved her enough to carry her until she proved everyone wrong.